You talk about political correctness run amok.
This is about human rights. Do not go there. Does anyone want to challenge me on that?
Morning Joe, weekdays on MSNBC.
Spend time across this country and you start to see there are no local stories. You pull up the threads of some local headline, there's almost always something bigger. A flag in South Carolina, a clinic closing in Texas, an oil train from North Dakota moving through your town. What you see from your own front porch, it turns out to be the story of all of us in this country at this moment in time. And these are stories worth telling.
If you want a different kind of breaking news, turn to people who break the mold.
We come on the air with breaking news.
With coverage that takes you beyond the red banner.
A big, bitter fight shaping up on Capitol Hill at this hour.
And trusted NBC News journalists who report every angle.
In a matter of minutes, President Trump expected to sign yet another executive order.
From where the news is happening.
Casey Hunt manages to get right in the middle of it.
As it's unfolding.
What a roller coaster we are now on.
So when news breaks, you have everything you need to put the story together.
More than 1 billion people visit social networking sites every month. And chances are your kids are visiting them too. So talk to them about what they publish and post and what they don't publish and post, like phone numbers, addresses, and things they might regret someday. Have an open dialogue with them and help your kids navigate the internet safely. The more you know.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, only on MSNBC.
Let's pop in on the Senate Judiciary Committee holding hearings on the nominations of Rod Rosenstein to be Deputy Attorney General and Rachel Brand to be Associate Attorney General. Right now, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham.
An American campaign for president without some court approval.
So my answer to that, Senator, is I would hope, and I agree with you, that that would not happen.
Yeah. Okay. Are you familiar with the executive order regarding the DACA kids that President Obama issued?
Only by virtue of having read about it in the newspaper.
Okay. Do you know if it's constitutional or not?
I do not.
Okay. The executive order was to give legal status to, I think, 800,000 kids who were called DACA kids. They came here as small children, and President Obama gave them through an executive action legal status. Can you get back to me as to whether or not you think that falls within the president's prosecutorial discretion?
I don't believe it would be appropriate for me, Senator, to comment on an issue like that that might well be litigated, and my position I would have to consult with the appropriate experts in the department and reach a legal conclusion about what judgment to take. I would not offer an opinion, prejudge a case like that prior to or apart from the context of having to litigate it in my capacity as Deputy Attorney General.
Okay. Now, if there is an investigation...
listening in to this, we'll listen to it on the side. That is Lindsey Graham, Senate Judiciary Committee, talking to Rod Rosenstein, who is the appointee for the Deputy Attorney General position, who would lead an investigation into the Russia relations with the Trump campaign if he is nominated, if he's appointed. Joining me now is Bob Ferguson. He's the Attorney General for Washington State. Now, you will recognize him. It was his state that filed the lawsuit, the first lawsuit challenging President Trump's original travel ban order, ultimately bringing it to a halt. Sir, thank you for being back with us on MSNBC. You, I think, by now have had a chance to look at the new immigration order. Some describe it as a cleaned-up version, one that might withstand the scrutiny of the courts a little better. What's your reaction?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. And yeah, the bottom line is the new order, I think, really reveals what we saw in court for the past month, and that is that the original executive order was just unconstitutional and illegal, and numerous federal judges agree with our assessment. So the new revised order makes significant changes, so we really view it as capitulation by the president on numerous key aspects of our litigation.
Except that in capitulating and cleaning up the order, he gets a lot of what he was aiming to do, and you get less of an opportunity to push back on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he certainly narrowed it, but I'm not sure I would say the changes were insignificant. For example, it no longer applies to green card holders. That's 500,000 people in our country. Does not apply to folks with visas. That's many tens of thousands. Does not apply to Syria on a permanent basis. Drops Iraq. You get the idea. Those are just some of the examples. So those are significant changes that really will have profound impacts on people throughout our country.
I want to tell you something about Secretary of Homeland Security John Kelly said yesterday. He said the administration is weighing a plan that would separate women and children who are crossing the border illegally. Let's listen to this.
I would do almost anything to deter the people from Central America to getting on this very, very dangerous network that brings them up through Mexico into the United States.
Let me just be precise.
Right.
If you get some young kids who are coming in, manage to sneak into the United States with their parents, our Department of Homeland Security personnel going to separate the children from their moms and dads.
Yes, I am considering, in order to deter more movement along this terribly dangerous network, I am considering exactly that. They will be well cared for as we deal with their parents.
What are your thoughts on that?
Look, an hour ago I kissed my 9-year-old twins goodbye as they set off for school this morning. I can't imagine a more heartless approach to an important public policy issue than that. And just when you think there's nothing that key administration officials are going to say that are going to surprise you, something like this comes along. So I guess I'm not quite sure where to start with responding to that.
The new immigration order drops language offering preferential status to persecuted religious minorities. This was a provision that was widely interpreted as favoring one religious group or favoring Christians over Muslims in particular. Are you looking at these changes that have been made and saying that there's another court challenge in here in the future, or is the battle somewhere else now?
Well, we're certainly doing our analysis, right? We're looking at the executive order, and what we're doing for the next 24 to 48 hours is going back and talking to Washington State colleges and universities to see, for example, what impact there might be on students. We're going to be looking and talking to businesses that were key supporters of our original litigation, as you know. Bottom line is we need to determine what's the harm to Washington State and Washingtonians in light of the new executive order. If we think there is that harm, that we can go back to court and have a strong constitutional claim, then we'll do it. If not, we need to reevaluate. But I don't want to prejudge that decision. It's an important one, as you might imagine, and one we'll take our time on.
All right, Attorney General, Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson, good to see you again. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, just a few hours from now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions will sit down with leaders from some of the nation's most distinguished civil rights organizations. In a press release, civil rights leaders say they plan to express grave concern for several troubling actions by the Department of Justice and the Trump administration. One of the civil rights leaders set to meet with the Attorney General is Reverend Al Sharpton. There he is, president of the National Action Network and host of MSNBC's Politics Nation. He just touched down in D.C. moments ago, got in front of a camera, joins me now. Reverend Al, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Ali.
You and other leaders say there are a number of issues you're concerned about. What are you planning on honing in on with him?
Well, we want to hone in clearly on the aspects of this travel ban in terms of how it can be used to profile people. Many of, there are 6 of us meeting our organizations have been on record dealing with racial profiling, and this certainly is a profiling an area of real concern. We also want to deal with the Voting Rights Act. We just had the celebration of the 52nd anniversary of going across the Edmund Pettus Bridge that led to the Voting Rights Act in '65, that in many ways have been neutralized with the support of this Attorney General when he was in the Senate, and who has now said that he will not continue, as the Department of Justice has been doing, to support the whole fight in the Texas voter ID law case. The Legal Defense Fund, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Sherilyn Ifill, who will be one of the 6 leaders in the meeting, is directly involved in that. Yep. We want to talk about police reform. He says he's against consent decrees. Well, that's right down the area that many of us, National Action Network and others, have been involved with. And the case of Walter Scott, the man shot in the back in North Charleston, South Carolina by a police officer. that was indicted, the trial waiting. We want to know, is he moving forward on that trial, and where are they on the Department of Justice investigation on the chokehold murder of Eric Garner in New York? So there's a lot of things that we are directly involved in that we want to address him on.
It's going to be a busy meeting. I want to switch for a moment, Reverend, to talk about the comments made by HUD Secretary Ben Carson yesterday. Very strange. I remember hearing them when he said them. He likened slaves to immigrants during a speech to employees. Listen to this.
That's what America is about. A land of dreams and opportunity. There were other immigrants who came here in the bottom of slave ships, worked even longer, even harder for less. But they too had a dream that one day their sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, great-grandsons, great-granddaughters might pursue prosperity and happiness in this land.
Secretary Carson then took to Facebook last night. He made this statement: the slave narrative and immigrant narrative are two entirely different experiences. Slaves were ripped from their families and their homes and forced against their will after being sold into slavery by slave traders. The immigrants made the choice to come to America. The two experiences should never be intertwined nor forgotten. Reverend Al, I hand it over to you for your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that he released a statement last night, because I was beginning to wonder if the doctor needed a doctor. I mean, to even act as though those that came in the bottom of slave ships dreamed of their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren having a better life. They dreamed of going back to their homeland.
Right. Dreamed of not being in chains.
Eventually, those that became their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, dreamed of a better life for their kids. But those that came at the bottom of the ships was dreaming they would not be kidnapped or that they would be returned home. That's one. But secondly, I think that we're seeing a pattern here. We see the Education Secretary DeVos act as though historic black colleges actually tweeted this out, was the pioneers of
school choice,
of pro-choice, of school choice, rather, of school choice options in education, when in fact they were reacting to no choice. Now we have this. I mean, I think we need to give a crash course to the Trump administration on American history, and particularly African American history, because you already have two cabinet members that got it embarrassingly wrong.
We will leave it there. It's a good point to consider. And to close on, Reverend Al, good luck in your deliberations this afternoon. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to all of you out there for watching this hour of MSNBC. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at Ali Velshi, on Snapchat, at Velshi. Right now on MSNBC, Andrea Mitchell Reports is live from the State Department. Andrea.
Thank you, Ali. And right now on a special edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports, live from the State Department, Obamacare Light. Republicans on Capitol Hill rolling out their plan to replace Obamacare. But there is still the question of how to pay for it, and not all Republicans are on board.
We can act now, or we can keep fiddling around and squander this opportunity to repeal Obamacare and begin a new chapter of freedom for the American people.
Will this bill cover more Americans or less Americans than are covered right now?
Will it cover more Americans with affordable health care than today? Is probably the key question.
So what we're trying to do is what we pledged we would do, is not pull the rug out from anybody.
Absence of proof, 4 days and counting, still no evidence of President Trump's startling claim that President Obama tapped his phones, fueling Democratic demands to hand the Russia investigation over to a special prosecutor. The man taking over that investigation and who would appoint that special prosecutor was asked about that at his confirmation hearing today.
So I'm trying to figure out what your bottom line is. I interpret that as a no. Is that fair?
Well, I don't know, Senator. I think the answer is I'm simply not in a position to answer the question, because I don't know the information that they know, the folks who are in the position to make that decision.
I think a system that empowers patients through both transparency and accountability. The President spoke last Tuesday, to a joint session of Congress, and he laid out his principles. First, wanted to make certain that those with pre-existing illness and injury were not priced out of the market. Nobody ought to lose their coverage because they get a bad diagnosis. terms of affordability, health savings accounts, growing choices for patients is incredibly important. Tax credits that allow individuals to be able to purchase the kind of coverage that they want, not that the government forces them to buy. We've always talked about in terms of what kinds of reforms need to be put in place, that we need to equalize the tax treatment for the purchase of coverage. Those, again, in the employer-sponsored market, they get a tax benefit for buying health coverage. Those folks that are out there in the individual and small group market, no tax benefit. And that's what this plan would do. State flexibility. It's incredibly important that we allow the states to be the ones that are defining what health coverage is, have the flexibility, especially in the Medicaid program, to be able to respond to their vulnerable population. Lawsuit abuse, the President mentioned, and it's incredibly important. The practice of defensive medicine wastes billions and billions of dollars every single year, and we need to make certain that we're addressing that as well. The President also talked about a glide path, an appropriate transition to this new phase for health care for our country, and that's important as well, so that nobody falls through the cracks. Buying across state lines, buying insurance across state lines. The President talked about this on the campaign over and over. American people understand the common sense nature of purchasing across state lines, and it increases competition, and we need to make certain that that happens, and then addressing the incredible increase in drug prices. There are three phases of this plan. One is the bill that was introduced last evening in the House of Representatives. That's the start of all of this. Second are all the regulatory modifications and changes that can be put into place. As you all well know, the previous administration used regulations to a fare thee well. In fact, there were 192 specific rules that were put out as they relate to Obamacare, over 5,000 letters of guidance and the like. And we are going to go through every single one of those and make certain that if they help patients, then we need to continue them. If they harm patients or increase costs, then obviously they need to be addressed. And then there's other legislation that will need to be addressed that can't be done through the reconciliation process. So the goal of all of this is patient-centered health care, where patients and families and doctors are making medical decisions and not the federal government. We commend the House for the introduction of the bill yesterday, and we look forward to working with all individuals in this process. And I look forward to a few questions. Yes, sir.
Secretary, you're familiar from your time in the House with the clout that conservative groups like the Club for Growth and Heritage Action have with rank-and-file members. What does it say about this legislation that these groups are already out with opposition to it?
Well, I think that this is the beginning of the process, and we look forward to working with them and others to make certain that, again, we come up with that process that aligns with the principles that we've defined, that they actually adhere to or agree with as well, and that is that we need a system that's affordable for folks, a system that's accessible for individuals, that's of the highest quality, that incentivizes innovation, and that empowers patients. And so we look forward to working with them through this process.
Secretary, Congressman Chaffetz said today that Americans may have to forego a new iPhone to pay for health care, and they'll have to kind of make these choices. Does the administration agree with that? Will Americans under this plan, will they need to maybe sacrifice other goods to pay for their health care?
This is an important question, because what's happening right now is that the American people are having to sacrifice in order to purchase coverage. And as I mentioned, many individuals can't afford the kind of coverage that they have right now. So they've got that insurance card, but they don't have care. What our desire is to drive down the health care costs for everybody. And the way that you do that is to increase choices for folks, increase competition, return the regulation of health care where it ought to be, which is at the state level, not at the federal level. All of these things that taken in their aggregate will in fact decrease the cost of health care and health coverage, and that will allow folks to be able to purchase the coverage that they want. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Price. I have two questions for you. The first has to do with guarantees that you can make as the administration's point person on this legislation. Can you guarantee that whatever legislation emerges and makes it to the president's desk will allow individuals, if they like their doctor, they can keep their doctor? And the second guarantee is, can you also guarantee that health care premiums for individuals will come down with this new legislation?
Again, a remarkably important question, because as you'll recall, the promise from the last administration was if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Both of those promises turned out to be not true. We think it's incredibly important for the American people to be able to select the physician and the place where they're treated themselves, that the government ought not be involved in that process. And so our goal is to absolutely to make certain that individuals have the opportunity to select their physician. In terms of premiums, we believe strongly that through this whole process and as it takes effect, that we'll see a decrease in not only the premiums that individuals will see, but a decrease in the cost of health care for folks. Remember that was another promise that the previous administration made, that you'd see a decrease in $2,500 on average for families across this land. In fact, what they've seen is an increase of $2,500 or $3,000. So we're going to go in the other direction. We're going to go in a direction that empowers patients and holds down costs.
Yes. Mr. Secretary, you are quite a distance away from conservatives with this plan, and the central part of it, which is tax credits, which they see as yet another entitlement, very similar to the entitlement of Obamacare. They're different in form. How do you convince them, since it's going to take tax credits to make this work, that they need to swallow this and move forward with the bill? I mean, you're getting an awful lot of opposition on this central tenet of this whole thing.
This is all about patience. And in order to provide that transition, and in order to make it so that nobody falls through the cracks, we've got to have a system that allows for individuals to gain the kind of coverage that they want. And we, conservatives and others, have said for a long, long time that we believe it's important to equalize the tax treatment for those purchasing coverage, gaining coverage through their employer, and those not. And the tax credit is the opportunity to be able to equalize that tax treatment. Folks have talked about this for many years, actually, so that there's not a distortion in the tax code for who's able to gain a benefit for being able to purchase coverage and not. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, Mr. Secretary, you were talking about making sure people don't fall through the cracks. The last administration with Obamacare focused in on making sure the underserved were part of the equation. What is the safety net or the safeguard that you have to make sure, to ensure people don't fall through the cracks beyond the tax incentives, but also for the underserved who are now many are now part of the program that weren't before prior to.
Yeah, this is extremely important as well, and the current system, as you likely know, for those vulnerable in our population, especially in the Medicaid population, this is a system that's broken. You've got a third of the physicians in this country, 1/3 of the doctors in this country that would be eligible to see Medicaid patients who aren't seeing Medicaid patients right now. And it's not because they've forgotten how to take care of patients, it's because of the rules that are in place that make it too onerous or too difficult for them to see Medicaid patients. So we believe that it's important to allow states to have that flexibility to fashion the program for their vulnerable population that actually responds to that population in a way that gives them the authority, them the choices, them the opportunity to gain coverage and the care that they believe most appropriate.
When you find out that is not happening when you give it to the states, is there some type of punishment or some type of piece that you're going to put in place to make sure that happens, that they follow through on your intent?
Yeah, absolutely. There's accountability throughout the plan that we have that would allow for the Secretary and the Department to be certain that the individuals that we believe need to be cared for are being cared for in the state at the appropriate level. But we believe this is a partnership. This is about patience and partnership. The previous administration tended to make it about government. We believe it's about patience and partnership, and we want to partner with every single person in this land who wants to make certain that we allow the kind of choices and quality to exist. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, the President tweeted earlier today, he described this bill as our wonderful new health care bill. There's been a little bit of confusion. Does this represent the administration's bill, and is there anything in this bill that the administration cannot support?
This has been a work in progress. As you know, this has been going on for over a year. The work that I had the privilege of participating in when I served in the House of Representatives in the last Congress was open and transparent, and we invited folks in to give their ideas, and tens, if not hundreds, of people had input into that process. This grew out of that, and over the past number of weeks we've been having conversations with folks on the Hill, in the House and in the Senate, and other stakeholders. And so this is a work product that is a result of all of that process. The President and the administration support this step in the right, what we believe is in the right direction, a step that repeals Obamacare and gets us moving in the direction of those principles that I outlined.
Do you support everything that's in that bill that's sitting on the table, sir? Do you support everything that's in the bill sitting on the table, sir?
Well, this is a work in progress, and we'll work with the House and the Senate in this process. As you know, it's a legislative process that occurs. I'm glad you pointed out the bills on the table there. As you'll see, this bill right here was the bill that was introduced in 2009 and 10 by the previous administration. Notice how thick that is. Some of you will recall that I actually turned the pages and went through that piece of legislation in a YouTube. The bill on the pile on the right is the current bill, and what it means is that we are making certain that the process, that the decisions that are going to be made are not going to be made by the federal government. They're going to be made by patients and families and doctors.
Mr. Secretary, given the opposition that John and others have brought up here today, does this plan already need to be salvaged in your view, and how do you do it?
Oh no, you know what happens with these things. You start at a starting point. People engage and they get involved in the process. Sometimes to a greater degree, nothing focuses the mind like a bill that's currently on the table and that has a work in progress or in process. And we'll work through it. This is an important process to be had. The American people have said to their elected leaders that the Obamacare process for them gaining coverage and care is not working. That's what they've said. And so we believe it's important to respond to the American people and provide a health care system that allows for them to purchase the kind of coverage and care that they desire.
You said in your letter to the House Chairman that necessary technical and appropriate changes might need to be made for this bill to reach the President's desk. So what specific changes is the White House and the administration looking for in this bill?
Well, as I mentioned, there are three different phases to this process. One is this bill, this legislation that's working through under the rules of reconciliation, which is a fancy term to mean that there are only certain things that you can do from a budgetary standpoint has to affect either spending or revenue. There are things that you can't do in this bill, and those we plan on doing across the horizon in Phase 2, which is the regulatory portion, and then in Phase 3, which is another piece of legislation that would be going through the House and the Senate with a majority, supermajority in the Senate. That process will incorporate all of the kinds of things that we believe are absolutely necessary to reconstitute that individual and small group market and to get us in a position again where patients and families and docs are making these decisions.
Bearing in mind that the CBO score isn't yet, can you guarantee that this plan will not have a markedly negative impact on the deficit or result in millions of Americans losing health insurance?
What I can say is that the goal and the desire I know of the individuals on the Hill is to make certain that this does not increase the cost to the federal government.
Two elements.
Who need to see particular physicians who aren't able to see them. All Americans should be saddened by the situation that we have when there are patients out there that can't get the care that they need. We believe one of the keys to providing appropriate care in the Medicaid population is allowing the states to have the flexibility to address that Medicaid population. Remember, Medicaid population is four different demographic groups. It's those who are disabled, it's those who are seniors, it's healthy moms and kids by and large. Those are the four main demographic groups. And we, the federal government, force states mostly to take care of those individuals in exactly the same way. If you describe that to the folks back home on Main Street, they say that doesn't make any sense at all. You need a program that's different for the healthy moms and kids to respond to their needs, that's different than folks who are disabled and seniors. And so what we believe is appropriate is to say to the states, you know your population best. You know best how to care for your vulnerable population. We're going to watch you and make certain that you do so, but you know how to do that. And that'll decrease costs markedly in the Medicaid program. We're wasting significant amounts of money. Not that folks are getting too much care, We're wasting it because it's inefficient and there's significant abuse in the system. So in terms of the cost sharing, I think that the cost sharing measures are being addressed. It's important that we run through that process. This is the process where we felt the previous administration was spending money that they didn't have the authority to spend, and Congress is working through that to make certain that the rightful holders of the authority to spend money in this nation, which is the Congress of the United States, exercises that authority.
Mr. Secretary, how does the White House and you feel about the label Trump care?
Well, I'll let others provide a description for it. I prefer to call it patient care. This is about patients at the end of the day. This isn't about politicians. This isn't about insurance companies. This is about patients. And patients in this nation, especially those in the individual and small group market. These are the folks. I had the privilege of going to Cincinnati last week with the Vice President to a small business roundtable. And one of the business owners, one of the small business owners there, said he had 18 employees last year at this time. This year he has 15 employees, not because he doesn't have the work, but because of the cost of health coverage for those individuals forced him to let 3 people go. Now, they're being forced to let 3 people go because the federal government has put in place rules and regulations that make it virtually impossible for folks in the individual and small group market to provide coverage for their employees. This is a system that's not working for people. So if we focus on the patients, I'll call it patient care. If you focus on the patients, we'll get to the right answer.
A major complaint of conservatives, a major complaint of conservatives with phase 1 of the Obamacare repeal and replace is that it is missing a measure that would allow health care to be sold across state lines. Now, the president said this morning that that would be in either phase 2 or phase 3. Is that something that you believe the president could do through executive action and then you yourself could do? Or is that something that you believe has to be addressed legislatively?
There are different aspects to the purchase across state lines that will allow that they want. Some of this might be from a regulatory or a rule standpoint. Some of it will require legislation, and that's where we're going to need the assistance of our friends on the other side of the aisle. The American people have demanded that they be able to purchase coverage across state lines, purchase coverage that they want for themselves. So whether it's through association health plans, which allows individuals who are in small business groups, like the fellow that I just mentioned, to pool together nationally to be able to purchase coverage, or whether it's mom and dad who don't gain coverage through their employer through something called individual health pools that allows folks to pool together solely for the purpose of purchasing coverage, even though they're not otherwise economically aligned. That allows people, there are 18 million folks in that individual and small group market. That would allow those individuals to be able to purchase coverage and get the purchasing power of millions. That's huge power and authority that we want to put in the hands of people, that we want to put in the hands of patients, and some of that may in fact require legislation. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. 2 questions, but first, Congressman John Faso of New York has said that the issue of denying federal funds to Planned Parenthood should be separate from whatever health care bill finally emerges from Congress and is signed into law by the President. Is that the administration's position as well? And the second question is this. You mentioned earlier the people who had their health care plans canceled when they thought they could keep it. I believe in your state of Georgia, more than 1 million people had that experience. Will some of the plans that were canceled be able to come through the new health care plan?
In terms of we think it's important that the legislature work its will on this process. It's incredibly important that we not violate anybody's conscience. We want provisions that exist. It's also important to appreciate that through community proposed right now would allow greater access for women to health care in greater numbers of facilities and they've actually proposed more money for women's health care than currently exists. So I think that to address that issue. In terms of whether or not old plans that were available before might be available, absolutely, and we believe that the opportunity to provide a robust market, robust choices for individual land will be secure. That's one of the keys to bringing down the premium down the cost for health coverage. So we're excited about that and look forward to that coming to pass.
Mr. Secretary.
If the new plan calls for repealing the revenue taxes and penalties, but sustainable.
Well, that's the work that somebody mentioned over here, the Congressional Budget Office score, and once the Congress receives that score, we'll be working through that to make certain that, in fact, responsible. Imagine, if you would, however, a system where the incentives within the system are all to drive down costs, to provide greater choices and competition, and respond to the specific needs of patients. And in so doing, what you do is actually get a much more efficient system for the provision and the delivery of health. Because the previous administration felt that the federal government ought to do all of this. And we've seen what came about when the federal government does all of that. That is, increasing premiums, increasing deductibles, decreasing choices. You got a card that says you've got insurance and you walk in and you can't afford what it is that's trying to, for the doctor that's trying to take care of you. So this is a system that's working for folks in that small group market and in the exchanges.
Mr. Secretary, many have complained that Obamacare resulted in higher wait times in the emergency room. Will this new bill put? Do you have any idea on that?
One of the things that the previous administration said was that they were going to be able to drive folks away from expensive areas for the provision of health care, and that is the emergency rooms. Did just the opposite. And much of that is because of, again, the rules and the regulations that they put in place. If individuals are able to purchase the kind of coverage that they want, providers that they desire, emergency room, they'll already have that the care. Emergency rooms ought to be for emergencies, not for the state that individuals tend to receive right now. So we believe that if you put in place the right system, then emergency rooms and emergency physicians will be able to have the opportunity to care for those individuals that appropriately present to their department.
Mr. Secretary, I'm interested in following up on your comment that it's important that no one vote on anything that violates their conscience. Federal funding already used for abortions, but are you saying the administration has a position on provision of birth control at these community health centers? And secondly, is withhold funding to Planned Parenthood if they continue to provide?
Joint address, he expects 5 core principles to guide Congress through this health care process. First, ensure that the American people with pre-existing conditions have access to coverage. Second, ensure a stable transition for Americans currently enrolled in the exchanges. Third, provide more equitable tax treatment through tax credits for people who already don't receive tax advantage health care from their employer. And I know that's something that Secretary Price was talking about. For the vast number of people who get their insurance through their employer, they're getting it tax-free. They are not taxed on that benefit, which is something that is not afforded to people who are in the individual market who either run a small business or are sole proprietors. Fourth, we should expand the power of health savings accounts to return control to Americans over their health care dollar and decisions. They should be able to choose the plan they want, not the plan that's forced on them by government. And finally, we should give our state governors the resources and flexibility they need with Medicare to make sure that no one is left out. This is the Obamacare replacement plan that everyone has been asking for, the plan that the president ran on, and the plan that will ultimately save the system. It's also a culmination of years of dedicated work and careful thought by Republicans to find a replacement that will best undo the damage that's been caused by Obamacare, while ensuring that all Americans have peace of mind during this stable transition period. These are the principles for which conservatives have been fighting for years. President Trump looks forward to continuing the dialogue between and the Hill on saving the health care system. What's important to remember is that we're not going to be able to do all of this in one bill. As the Secretary mentioned, there are 2 other steps as well that allow us to get more of the President's plan accomplished after we pass this first important major step. The second piece is already underway, and that's what Secretary Price can do through executive action. He has already rolled out a handful of important actions, including the major marketplace stabilization regulation to help bring stability to the collapsing insurance market. market. He'll continue to enact a number of policy changes in the regulatory and administrative space to achieve what the first step cannot because of the nature of reconciliation. The third piece of executing the president's health care plan requires 60 votes in legislation, maybe more depending on what we can do and when. That's how we'll move forward on the policies of purchasing across state lines, lowering drug prices that just came up, and repealing any of Obamacare's premium spiking insurance market distortions that can't be done through this current bill. Also yesterday, in addition to speaking with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, the president also had separate calls with Prime Minister of Japan, Abe, and South Korean's acting President Hwang. During both of these calls, the president reiterated the United States' ironclad commitment to stand with Japan and South Korea in the face of the serious threat posed by North Korea. He also emphasized that the administration is taking steps to further enhance our ability to deter and defend against North Korea's ballistic missiles using a full range of the United States' military capabilities. Moving on to today's schedule, this morning the president had a call with President Kenyatta of Kenya. He'll have a readout for that call soon if it's not already out. The president and the First Lady also announced the official reopening of public tours here at the White House. You may have seen the president stop by to greet some of the first visitors on their tour. We're looking forward to welcoming the American people back to what is affectionately referred to as the People's House. We are the world's only executive residence and office of head of state that also serves as a museum free to the people. Visiting the White House is obviously an experience uniquely American, and we encourage guests of all ages to come visit the White House, their house. Also this morning, the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, held a press conference announcing that Chinese ZTE Corporation has agreed to a record high combined criminal and civil penalty of $1.19 billion after the company illegally shipped telecommunications equipment to Iran and North Korea in violation of sanctions. This civil penalty is the largest ever imposed by the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, and pending approval from a federal judge, the combined penalties between the Commerce Department, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Treasury would be the comment, and we were asking the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees to look into this concern and report back.
Can't the president just ask the FBI director?
Well, I think.
Has he asked him?
No, the president has not, and I think that we've gone back and forth with you guys. I think there is clearly a role that Congress can play in its oversight capabilities. They've made it very clear that they have the staff, the resources, and the process. I think that's the appropriate place for this to handle. I think if we were to start to get involved, you would then write stories about how we were getting involved. So it's a no-win situation. I think the smartest and most deliberative way to address this situation is ask the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, who are already in the process of looking into this, to look into this and other leaks of classified information that are troubling to our nation's national security. So, as the president said in the statement on Sunday, we believe that investigation, as well as the investigation of other classified leaks and other important information that threatens our national security, be looked into by the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, and then we encourage them to report back.
Can I ask this? Do you believe that President Obama
I get that that's a cute question to ask. My job is to represent the president and to talk about what he's doing and what he wants, and he has made very clear what his goal is, what he would like to have happen, and so I'll leave it at that. I think we've tried to play this game before. I'm not here to speak for myself. I'm here to speak for the President of the United States and our government. Zeke.
One following up on what Secretary Price said earlier. He was asked by John about whether the administration was willing to make for the American people right now who like their doctor or like their health insurance plan, is the White House willing to make a commitment today that when this replacement bill is passed, if it passes, that they will at the end of that be able to keep their doctor and keep their health care plan? And secondly, just changing gears radically onto China overnight issued some strong rhetoric and promising consequences for the deployment of the THAAD missile system in South Korea. If you could respond to that.
So on the first piece, I think, look, one of the things that's important to understand about this process that's very different from when the Democrats did it, you recall then Speaker Pelosi said you're going to have to read the bill to know what's in it. I think there's a big difference. This is the bill. It's right here. It's on the website. We're going through regular order. If you go to the House of Representatives website, Speaker Paul Ryan's website, it's listed. Everybody can read it, and it's going to go through what they call regular order. We're not jamming this down anybody's throat. It's going to go through a committee process. All parties involved, all representatives in the House will be able to have input into it. I think that's the way to conduct this process, is to do it to allow people to watch the process happen in the committees, allow members of Congress to have their input in it, to make amendments, to see that we get the best bill that achieves the goal for the American people. When it was done the last time, it was jammed down people's throat. And look what happened. You had 974 pages that people struggled to read afterwards and figure out what had just gotten passed, and the consequences were frankly devastating. So to your point about keeping your doctor, in a lot of cases you've lost your doctor for a couple reasons. One, they may not participate in the plan. They may not take insurance at all anymore. Two, they may not take Medicaid. Or three, they may not take Medicaid. And the list goes on about why they might not be there. Or your plan, the plan that you got, is no longer accessible. As the Secretary mentioned, 1/3 of all counties in the United States no longer take Medicaid, or excuse me, have only one plan that you can choose from. So it's a fact right now that in most cases, you have no choice. In many cases, you've lost that ability. Our goal is to actually add more choice and more competition. Right now, the government tells you you must have this plan or you will pay a penalty, and within this plan, here's what you have to have. We've lost the element of choice and competition in healthcare. And by bringing all of that back, I think there's a higher degree of likelihood that you're going to get the plan that you want and you're going to get the doctor you want, because it'll be your choice, not the government's choice. And that's a big, big difference. This plan was jammed down everybody's throat. And the consequences took their plans away, it took their doctors away, and it drove up costs. This plan allows more competition, more people to enter it, and the American people and patients to make a decision on what plan they want. If they have a plan and a doctor they like, then they're going to choose a plan that allows them to continue with that doctor. But there's going to be more competition and more choice, not less, and that's frankly what you have now. With respect to China, I think I addressed this yesterday. We stand shoulder to shoulder with Japan and South Korea, and doing what we can to protect that region in particular from an attack from North Korea. We understand the situation. We continue to work with them. As I mentioned, the President spoke to both leaders yesterday. We provided a readout of those calls. But we obviously understand the concerns of China. But this is a national security issue for them. Hunter.
Thank you, Sean. How concerned is the President with the situation between North Korea and Malaysia right now?
Well, as I've said, I think we're very well aware of what's going on in the region. The President obviously had a conversation with, in particular, the acting president of South Korea last night, and with respect to what's going on there. And again, I'll refer that to the National Security Committee to give you further. Cheryl Bolden. Cheryl. I know. I'm sorry, I forgot you yesterday.
I appreciate it. So two then questions. One on health care. If the CBO scores this bill and it does not provide the amount of coverage that the Affordable Care Act did, will the President still support it?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of, like Secretary Price mentioned this, let's not get ahead of the CBO going through this. But I think, as I mentioned to Zeke, one of the things that's important to understand, this bill has to be done in the phases that it has to address the repeal part of it and the replace part of it. There are only certain things that we can do through reconciliation, and then there's the regulatory piece that we can do through action that the Secretary is empowered to do, frankly, under Obamacare. And then third is an additional piece of legislation that addresses things. But there are cost-saving measures and competition aspects of this that have to be included in phase 2 or 3 because they are not allowed in the reconciliation bill because of the nature of how reconciliation works on Capitol Hill. So I think that one of the things that we have to understand is that how that score comes out from the Congressional Budget Office will depend on whether they look at it specifically with just a phase 1 or whether they look at it in its totality. But I'm confident that if you look at what's going on right now, Cheryl, it's unsustainable. I mean, premiums in state after state, as Dr. Price mentioned, they're up 25% on average. Arizona's 116%. I think, Oklahoma's in the 50s, Minnesota's in the 40s. I mean, this is unsustainable for a family to continue to pay the premiums that they have, and for individuals, small business owners, etc. So the question is, can we allow people to go on this trajectory where more and more of their paycheck is getting eaten up in a plan that's frankly not giving them choice, doctors, or plans that they want? This plan, I think, clearly achieves those goals a lot better. It gets the cost containment down, it gets price control under, and it allows doctors and plans to re-engage in the marketplace as they were prior to this. And I think that is a major aspect. Go ahead. Hold on. Cheryl waited.
Thank you. From yesterday, I had a nominations question. Is there something that's preventing the White House from submitting the nominations of Sonny Perdue for Agriculture and Alex Acosta for Labor?
I believe Alex Acosta was sent up to the Hill earlier today. We should have an announcement officially out, so sometimes there's a little bit of a lag. I apologize between my office but that one's up, and I'll check on Sonny Perdue. I think some of it's just in coordination with the Senate, so pardon my time. Trey.
I have two questions for you. First, will the president offer a correction to his tweet this morning that states that 122 prisoners were released from Gitmo by the Obama administration and then returned to the battlefield? You can take that first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the president meant in totality the number that had been released on the battlefield, that have been released from Gitmo since individuals have been released. So that is correct.
Then my second question, is the White House concerned about this new information that came out in WikiLeaks today that U.S. intelligence agencies are potentially purposely providing vulnerabilities to tech products here in the United States?
I'm not going to comment on that. I think obviously that's something that has not been fully evaluated, and if it was, I would not comment from here. Kevin. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, Sean, I was going to ask about branding. The president in the past put White House feel presented today should be known as Trump Care from here on out. I know it was asked to the secretary. And at what point do you think that the transition should go away from Obamacare to the?
Well, as soon as it's repealed, we can get rid of that. I think that'll happen quickly. And as Secretary Price mentioned, I think we're less concerned and more results. And I think that's what our focus has been, is getting that choice back that we mentioned. Yeah.
DHS is reportedly considering separating families that cross the border illegally. How does the president feel about that? I'm going to refer.
That's a DHS matter. I mean, we don't get involved in either customs or ICE enforcement. So I think that's a question better reserved to both DHS.
Oh, thanks, John. One of the criticisms on this is that mandate, because it allows insurance companies to increase premiums up to 30% if there's a gap in coverage. And I have one more.
Well, that's not. I mean, that's not a. I mean, the difference is under the current bill that's here, if you don't buy insurance, you pay a fine. Under the current bill, you don't have. There's nothing that mandates you to buy insurance. That's up to an individual. So, I mean, by its very definition, it is not, can't be considered that. What's your second one?
Okay. Well, I mean, you don't think it's a de facto mandate in the sense that there's a penalty in place, as there is now. I mean, it's not by the government, but it's by the insurance company.
Right, but there's no, that's, I mean, I think you answered your own question on that one.
I have one more.
Okay.
I just have to talk. But the president has blamed the Democrats in the Senate for blocking the cabinet. Last Thursday, the Republicans actually called a recess early, previously adjourned on Thursday early. Previously, they called a recess the week before. Does the president have any plans to call for the Senate to remain in session and Congress stay in session until they approve nominees and maybe even also?
Well, this isn't a Republican issue. I mean, it's not Republicans that are playing beat the clock on a lot of these nominees. I mean, we've discussed this since the transition time. I mean, there were several nominees that frankly weren't even considered controversial by the standards of Senate Democratic leadership, and yet have been held up over and over again. I don't think that's a very different scenario than going back and being with constituents, which was on the Senate schedule. So I don't think that's a synonymous thing. Do we have Michael Medved ready to go for our Skype question? Michael.
Sean, thank you very much. Obviously, today there was a big emphasis on Obamacare, which is profoundly important to the American people. But it seems that too often in the last several weeks, the administration and media have gotten distracted by the Trump Tower or the president calling his predecessor criticizing the ratings of Celebrity Apprentice. Do you think the White House could do a better job of focusing on the issues that really matter, the reforms that matter to the American people, rather than getting distracted to these subsidiary conflicts as we move forward into the coming months?
Thanks, Michael. Respectfully, I would say that we have been focused. We're here talking about Obamacare and the need to drive down the cost and access for health care for every American. I think that's a pretty significant thing to be focused on. Yesterday, talking about the president's effort to continue to keep the nation safe, to make sure that people aren't coming into the country for peaceful purposes. The president's talked to almost 50 world leaders. He's had 30. Look, whether it was candidate Trump, President-elect Trump, or now President Trump, the president has always made it very clear that one, or not he made it clear, but I think the voters made it clear that one that they appreciate about him is his ability to be authentic and to speak very forcefully and very directly with the American people. And that aspect that I think was central to why he was elected is because he's not a canned politician that's going to give the same state answers over and over again. Sarah.
Going back to Fred's question, conservatives have started to call this Obamacare light. President Trump has promised to fully repeal Obamacare, but this bill leaves a lot of the structure of Obamacare intact. If this is the policy that passes, is President Trump confident in the future he can say that he fully repealed Obamacare?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, the first half of the bill that we put forward repeals it. There are three things. Each phase that we've talked about, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, there's a repeal and replace aspect in each one. But Republicans and conservatives have been talking about added competition and driving costs down for decades now, across state lines, small business pooling, all of those things have been part of conservative plans for a long time. And I think instilling that competition in it, allowing more access, I think there's a big difference. There is no, we have, for the longest time, if you're a conservative, you think about this right now, that you have an employer-based, their job comes from an employer that they're getting a subsidy, they're getting a credit, they don't pay taxes on their health care, and their employer doesn't either. That's a huge disadvantage to anyone who's a sole proprietor or owns a small business. And so, frankly, to allow the playing field to be leveled and allow small businesses, which are frankly the job creators in this country, to allow entrepreneurs and self-starters to get the same tax treatment that a Fortune 500 company gets you, is a very conservative principle. And again, I think, look, one of the things that's important, Sarah, is for all of the people who have concerns about this, especially on the right, look at the size. This is the Democrats, this is us. There is, you can't get any clearer in terms of this is government, this is not. And I think that part of the reason the visual is important is that when you actually look at the difference, you realize this is what big government does. It crowds out competition, it drives up prices, it stifles entrepreneurship and innovation, doctors leaving the markets, more and more people not taking Medicaid or TRICARE. That should concern people. When you've got veterans that can't, because most of the time Medicaid and TRICARE are tied together. So when you have those systems not accepted by doctors, that means the lowest of the people on the low-income scale and people who have served our country have fewer and fewer choices. That alone should be a problem and concerning for many people. But the premium spikes are another problem because, again, even if you're in the exchange, now you're seeing over and over again that happen. You're also seeing young people decide that they'd rather just pay a penalty. Because the cost of those basic programs is out of reach for a lot of young people who are just entering the job market. But again, I think the greatest illustration of the differences in the approaches is that size. Our bill, which is a tenth of the size, does repeal and replace in what their bill just did in massive government bureaucracy. And that is a big difference. Jim.
Just want to ask you, I mean, you had the Health and Human Services Secretary out here. You just talked about this is the Republican bill, this is the Democrat bill. Is that the president's bill? Is that his health care bill?
That is a bill that we have worked with Congress. We feel very good about where it is. We are looking forward, as I mentioned earlier, the president's meeting with the whip team to encourage them to support it and to build it out. I don't think, and I'm not trying to be cute here, but I think it's not his bill or their bill. It's a bill that we have worked on with them together. We're very proud of where it stands now. The big difference, Jim, is that unlike before, as I mentioned, when the Democrats jammed it down people's throat and said, waited to get that 60th vote before with Senator Kennedy still around, and then basically said, literally, you will have to wait and see what it looks like before we passed it. We not only posted it out there for everybody to look at, but by sending it through regular order, not just putting up for a House vote, but sending it through the committee process, allows Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike to offer up amendments and suggestions, and the House will work its will. Now, we will continue to give guidance and thoughts and suggestions, but I think the president's core principles are what's going to guide us as we head through the Hill and then the House and then to the Senate.
And just one quick follow-up on Jonathan Karl's question, because the president made a very serious allegation over the weekend, and I think we would all be remiss if we went through this briefing and not try to get you on camera to at least offer us some evidence. Where is the evidence? Where is the proof that President Obama bugged President Trump?
Well, I answered this question yesterday on camera on your air. So just so we're clear, I know this is now will be twice, but I think I made it clear yesterday.
But since yesterday,
nothing has changed.
Proof?
No, it's not a question of new proof or less proof or whatever. It's the answer is the same, and I think that that there is a concern about what happened in the 2016 election. The House and Senate Intelligence Committees have the staff and the capabilities and the processes in place to look at this in a way that's objective, and that's where it should be done. And frankly, if you've seen the response from, especially on the House side, but as well as the Senate, they welcome this. And so let's let the Senate do their job and the House, Intelligence Committees, and then report back to the American people.
Yeah. Will the president withdraw the accusation? Does he have any?
Why would he withdraw it until it's adjudicated? That's what we're asking, is for them to look at this and see if there is
no regrets of him about raising this accusation.
Absolutely not. And I think that what he wants them to do is to look into wiretapping, other surveillance, and again, as I mentioned before, the other leaks that are threatening our national security. You're seeing the leaks happen over and over again that come out throughout the administration, throughout government, that undermine national security. And I think the appropriate thing to do is to ask the House and the Senate to look into it. Glenn Thrush.
Sean, so to follow up on the follow-up, in terms of, you were given an opportunity on air to say whether or not the president still supported Director Comey. Does the president support Director Comey? Then a quick follow-up.
I have no reason to believe he doesn't. He has not suggested that to me. So now to the non-follow-up to the...
Have you seen any evidence yourself? Has it been shared with you or other members, senior members of the president's staff, as to why he made this particular accusation?
As far as me, no. I'm not in a position that would be regularly part of my daily duties for the president to sit down and go through that. That's probably a level above my pay grade. But as I've mentioned, I think the president believes that the appropriate place for this to be adjudicated is for the House and Senate Intelligence Committees to have the clearances, the staff, the processes to go through this, look at it, and report back. Yeah.
Did he share it with?
I'm not going to get it. Look, as the president made very clear, Glenn, I'm not. As the president said in the statement that he issued on Sunday, we're not going to have further comment on this until this matter is resolved. Yes.
Two quick questions. So just to follow up on the follow-up. So does the White House feel that it's appropriate? You say that you want it to be adjudicated by the congressional committees,
Right.
but the president made declarative statements
Right.
on Twitter. So I guess is the White House position that the president can make declarative statements about a former president basically committing a crime, and then the congressional committee should look into that and basically prove it? I mean,
Well,
I
no,
guess
it's not a question. No, but I would take issue with. It's not a question of prove it. I think, as I said now 5 times to the follow-up, that it's not a question of prove it. Is that they have the resources and the clearances and the staff to fully and thoroughly and comprehensively investigate this, and then issue a report as to what their findings are.
So, but President Trump's Twitter statement shouldn't be taken at face value about what.
Sure, it should. Of course it. I mean, what? No, there's nothing. As I mentioned to Jim, it's not that he's walking anything back or regretting. He's just saying that they have the appropriate venue and capabilities to review this. Margaret, I'm sorry.
Just on the Obamacare replacement. So you've said that it'll be in phases and that you're going to need additional legislation. So just to clarify, are the cost saving that you guys are projecting, is that dependent on phase 3 on the national competition plan?
Yeah, well, it's not dependent. I think that in order to see it fully come to fruition, yeah, you have to see all parts of it. But the way that it was passed doesn't allow for the way that it was passed. Is almost the same way that we're going through this now, which is they pass certain things, then the Secretary of Health and Human Services at the time was granted significant regulatory authority that allowed her to do certain things at the time to implement pieces of Obamacare that we now have to act backwards and go almost in the same steps to do what they did to lay it out. We've got to repeal it, and then we've got to replace it with the plan that's going to do the same. Certain things can be done in the same way and certain things can't. It literally depends on how that was done. John Frederick.
Sean, in the replacement plan, it says that the states that accepted the Medicare expansion money would continue to be funded. So what is the message you have to Republican state legislators that thought they were fiscally responsible in rejecting Medicaid expansion in their states, and now they didn't get the federal dollars on either end? What is your response?
I think what we need to do is to make sure, as the president said in his statements, as Secretary Price did, we've got to make sure that we continue to protect people through this transition process. Let the bill work its way. But this is the first time, as we address the Medicaid portion of this, this is probably the first time that we've really addressed an entitlement aspect of something in almost 30 years. So I think we've got to let this piece of it work its way through the House. Remember, one of the things that happened through the Medicaid expansion was the goal has always been of Medicaid to help people who were disabled or poor or met a specific number of criteria. For the first time in Obamacare, we expanded Obamacare, or the Obama administration did rather, to able-bodied individuals that in a way that had never been done before, and it was not a specific class. That's led largely to the ballooning cost. I think a lot of the reforms that will be contained in this bill will address that, but I think we've got to let it work its will through the process. Alexis.
Sean, I want to ask you 2 communications questions on 2 topics. Because the president gave himself a middling grade on communication, let me ask you about the experience that the previous administration had when Obamacare was going through its own phases. President Obama said that the opposition to the legislation was able to seize the opportunity while it was being legislated to create public perceptions about what was in the legislation. So my question is on ACA. What is the president going to do to improve his communications, to be out there explaining what is in the bill, to work with lawmakers? That's the first one, and then I'll ask you the next one.
Okay, thank you. So on the first one, as I mentioned, he's had and continues to have significant outreach to members of Congress. He's talked to health insurers. I mean, I think we've read out a lot of the activities the last couple of weeks, and literally in just within an hour, he's going to sit down with the House Deputy Whip team to talk about the legislative piece of this in the House. So this is going to be a very aggressive, laser-like focus of this administration over the next month or two to get this thing through the House and then moved over to the Senate. But there's a big difference, Alexis. What we're doing is vastly different. We're expanding government, promising people something, and I think what's happened is there was a lot of difference with how the approach is happening. Right now, the American people, no matter where you are, you understand the state of your health care, the costs that you're seeing, and the lack of choice that you've now been presented with. And in many cases, you realize that when you go to a doctor or loved ones going to see a doctor, that they're not either able to get in, they're not taking the Medicare or the exchange insurance that they got. The costs are going out of control. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that Dr. Price mentioned that is so apropos of this is having a card does not mean you have insurance. It's like handing someone a blank check. It doesn't mean that you have money. It means you have a check. And I think what we've seen over the last few years with Obamacare is you can have an insurance card, but that doesn't mean someone's going to take it. And it sure doesn't mean that it's going to be affordable. And there's a big difference between having a card and having health care that's affordable. And that's the difference that we're trying to solve right now. And I think, so when it comes to communication, I think one of the things that's really helpful is that part of the sell is done for us. The American people understand the state of their health care. They understand how much they're paying for. They've gone to see a doctor or gone to a hospital or had a notice from their carrier saying, we are no longer part of this. Or their employer says, hey, whatever your particular carrier is, is no longer available. We're switching you into this. And so for so many Americans, healthcare is a very, very real part of their daily experience because they're caring for themselves or dealing with an ailment or dealing with children or a loved one or someone else in their family, where they're seeing firsthand the devastation and disaster that Obamacare has caused them in their personal life. So I think there's a welcoming of this effort, and I think it's a lot easier for us to go in because we don't have to explain the problem. People are living it. And I think for them to understand what we're giving you is more choice, greater competition. We're incentivizing more people to be part of the process, and we're going to be driving down costless premium. You had a second.
My second question on communications has to do with the president's assertion about the wiretapping.
Yeah.
Because the White House wants this now to be handled by the legislative branch and in confidence and classification, can we count on the president to himself, while this investigation is going on, to cease and desist using Twitter or any other public venue to make accusations that are in public but he will not respond to in public?
With respect to this particular situation, I'll ask that and I'll get back to you on that. John Gizzi.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Just getting back to the question about if one likes his or her health care, they can keep it. In 2013, Congressman Fred Upton, then chairman of the House Energy Committee, offered a legislation that put precisely those words into law, and it received the votes of every Republican member in the House and between 40 and 50 Democrats, and then it died in the Senate. Would the administration support a revival of the Upton Amendment? In other words, putting the right to keep one's health care plan and doctor if he or she liked it today?
I mean, I think that's the goal. I don't want to start talking about what we're going to, as we go through the process. We've now put our stamp on this and sent it to the House. It'll work its will as amendments come up through regular order. Our team will weigh in on those with their staff. And again, the president's meeting with the whip team today. I don't want to start saying we're going to support this amendment or that amendment now, but I think generally speaking, obviously the goal is to make sure that healthcare system that doesn't offer any choice or frankly isn't tailored to the needs that they have. I think that's an important thing. John.
Sean, right now you're 2 votes short of passing repeal and replace in the Senate because you've got 4 Republicans. What do you say to those senators who are very concerned that people will lose coverage, that this does not provide enough stability for those people who rely on Medicaid for their health care?
Well, there's 2 things, John. One is we're at day one. We're going to go through the House first, so we got a little bit of time. And I think as we go through that process, senators, and not just the additional 2, but I think and hope that we'll get additional ones that recognize that those people, as I've said over and over again here, it's if we do nothing, they're going to be in a very, very worse scenario than they are now. More and more people, if you're on Medicaid, which serves so many low-income Americans, they, as I mentioned, they have a card. And that card does not allow them to go to doctor after doctor who are saying, we're not going to take Medicaid or TRICARE anymore. So I would ask those senators, what are you doing to help us work on a bill that will get them insured again? Because for too many Americans, they've got a card, but they don't have insurance. And I think that's a very, very big thing, to a distinction to make. They're the ones who have the problem right now. They've got a Medicaid card and nowhere to go. And what we need to do is to make sure that low-income Americans, veterans, small business owners, individuals who desperately need health care have options and affordability.
One other piece of this, state lines, but the biggest driver of the increase in health insurance costs is the skyrocketing cost of medicine.
Right.
What in this overall plan do you propose to do to either cap the rise or even bring it down?
Well, I think the Secretary mentioned this, but I mean the cost of prescription drugs is no, it's not. It's a big factor. I think that.
But when you're paying $50,000 out of pocket to get a stent,
right? I mean, but again, what is the biggest thing missing?
But it's getting out of control. So
fair enough. But
fair enough. Drugs is one part of it.
No. But okay, you talk about procedures or drugs. The biggest thing that's missing in this whole equation is competition. There's no, I mean, we're down to one plan in many places. There's nothing for these places to compete.
There's competition between hospitals.
No, there's, I mean, that's fine, but if they know they're going to get the same reimbursement rate, if they know that there's no other options, that plans aren't trying to get people, then that's a big difference. Right now, there's a lack of competition in the industry, and I think one of the presidents, I get it may be one part of that, but you're right that all over medicine, procedures and such, but there's a reason he met with drug executives and talked about getting those costs down. That there's a multifaceted approach at how do we instill competition, how do we drive down costs. But you're right, we've got to do more to get the cost of that down, of the procedures, to allow additional options. Everything that, it's the same way that, again, think about your insurance. Right? One of the things that was driving up costs in the past was people were exercising the option of going to an emergency room over and over again for their primary care. And what happened is that you saw all of these, quote-unquote clinics pop up from around, and insurance carriers actually made it cheaper in terms of co-pays to go see that than an emergency room, driving people to somewhere that didn't continue to drive up costs, clog insurance. That competition alone starts saving the plans money and helping to keep costs down. We've got to instill more aspects of competition in medicine. Jennifer.
Can you give us an update on the effort to roll back regulations? Have the task force regulatory reform task forces identified any regulations to roll back, and have any actually been repealed?
I think that they have had their work cut out for them. They've started, as the president has met with different industries and companies, corporations, associations. That is a constant subject of discussion, which is those regulatory aspects of our economy that are keeping companies from growing, expanding, and hiring. And so I know that the domestic policy team and others have been working on that. And if I can get further updates on specific legislation, or excuse me, specific regulatory action, I'll get back to you, Hallie.
Thank you, John. Two topics for you. One, just trying to get some clarity on something that my colleagues have tried to follow up on as well. You've said that the president stands by his tweet Saturday morning. That President Obama ordered this wire. And let me just be clear, they found out this information. You've also said that the president wants Congress to investigate. Some members of Congress, by the way, have asked the White House and asked the president to come forward with that information. So bottom line, why would the president want Congress to investigate for information he already has?
I think there's a separation of powers aspect here, as I mentioned to Jonathan, that we think it's...
Talk about resources and time. Why waste that?
Well, it's not a question of waste it. It's a question of appropriateness.
But if the president has the info, and I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, if he's sitting on this information that he found out, he's now directing or asking or recommending that the intelligence committees look into this. And you talked about they have resources and staff, which they do. Right. But why expend those resources and staff if the president found out this information hasn't?
I think there's a difference between directing the Department of Justice, which may be involved in an ongoing investigation, and asking Congress as a separate body to look into something and add credibility to the look adds an element that wouldn't necessarily be there if we were directing the Department of Justice, for example. But again, I think we've made it very clear how he wants this done and where we go from there. So,
second question then. Millions of Americans are working on their tax returns right now. Will the president commit to releasing his tax returns for this year, and is he still under audit for his past returns?
My understanding is he's still under audit, and I'll follow up on the question. Yeah.
Question and quick follow-up. How do you react? How do you understand what we've seen on the growing number of cases at the Canadian border of Canadians born and raised in Canada with valid passport being stopped at the border and told just to go back? They won't let come in the U.S.
I'm not aware of that. I think that's something that probably should be addressed to the Department of Homeland Security.
There might be a misunderstanding of the messages sent.
I don't know, and I think it's a good question that is probably best directed towards the Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Swan.
Thank you. Is the White House going to keep its promise to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement? And our understanding is that there's some divisions of opinion. Rex Tillerson wants to stay in. Steve Bannon wants to get out. What's going on? Will you keep the promise? If not, why not?
Yeah, I think that's something I'd be glad to follow up with you and everyone. I don't have anything on that right now. I'm aware of the discussion of it, so let me, if I can, I'll get back to you. Mike.
I had an unrelated question, but I also want to follow up on something that was...
Unrelated questions are my favorite.
had asked. She talked about the communications strategy. Will the president play a public role in selling this bill? Will he speak to the public about it? Will he answer questions about it?
That's a good question. I think that we are going to have a very comprehensive strategy. As I mentioned, just a few minutes from now, the president is going to engage with members of the House whip team to talk to them. I understand that, but I know, and I understand that. This is step one, Mike. There's a lot of time. As I mentioned, we expect to be dealing with this for the next several weeks. There'll be plenty of opportunities for the president to speak about that, to engage with the public. But it's going to be a comprehensive plan that we will discuss. We had, I can't even begin to tell you how many administration folks, members of Congress, flooding the broadcast and radio airwaves today, both nationally and in local markets. We were very, very active throughout the country, getting out the word on what we're doing and why we're doing it, from national broadcast shows to cable to TV, to radio. We had a very, very aggressive start to this effort. We're working with the House in particular. We'll continue to start really engaging with the Senate. But this is going to be a comprehensive effort, working with the House and the Senate to get this thing done, and other partners, doctors and outside groups that share this concern. As I mentioned to the other folks, that there is, there's a need by companies and corporations who are feeling the weight of additional costs to join us. This is obviously something that needs to get dealt with. The escalating costs are having a significant impact, not just on our economy, but on the ability of people to get hired. Or frankly, people who are hired lose their job because the cost of health care is not allowing, especially people in the small and medium-sized businesses, to keep up with those costs. With that, thank you guys very much. I look forward to seeing you.
Meeting tomorrow. Congress coming to this meeting with the president.
We'll have a readout for you.
Sean, I had that unrelated question, which was...
I'm sorry. That's not fair. Mike gets his unrelated question.
Will the Trump, mine after that, please.
Will the Trump administration's practice of releasing publicly the business...
We're currently evaluating our procedures in that, and we'll have some, when we have an announcement, I'll let you know. I'll have a readout on our schedule for tomorrow later. I will have, and once it's confirmed, I will let you know first, and then everybody else. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Sean Spicer giving his first on-camera briefing in about a week. I'm Katie Tur here in New York. It is 2:54 on the East Coast. Much of that briefing right there was devoted to the Affordable Care Act and the bill that the House GOP has offered to replace it. Their version, called the American Health Care Act. We're also getting the first briefing from the State Department, being done by Mark Toner, not by Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State. And and Vice President Mike Pence talking to members of the Republican Party on the Hill today about this health care bill. Joining me is Casey Hunt, Harold Ford Jr., Ali Velshi, Joe Walsh, former Representative Joe Walsh, I should say, to give a lightning round to talk about what we just saw in that briefing. Also notable that Sean Spicer was asked repeatedly about Donald Trump's claims that President Obama was wiretapping him and Trump Tower during the campaign. So Joe Walsh, I want to go directly to you. Hallie Jackson had perhaps the best question of that whole briefing, if you ask me. She asked if Donald Trump, the president, has the evidence that President Obama wiretapped him during the election. Why would he not just give it to Congress instead of forcing them to investigate to find out what he says he already knows?
Katie, it makes no sense. Trump comes out Saturday and screams to the world that Obama did it. And all of Trump's people ever since are saying, we're not going to talk about it until we find out if Obama did it. I mean, that's crazy. And Katie, think about this. If Donald Trump was told by somebody like a James Comey or somebody that Obama did order the wiretapping, he never would have sent out a tweet like that. I mean, you and I know that. So they've handled this backwards. He made a mistake.
Casey Hunt, you are on Capitol Hill. You just spoke to Vice President Mike Pence. What is he doing there right now?
Well, we're still talking about health care up here, Katie, that bill that Republicans have unveiled, the American Health Care Act, which sounds a lot on the tongue like the Affordable Care Act, although maybe it's just me. But it's running into some trouble here for the reason that a lot of people are seeing, conservatives are seeing elements of what they say is the Affordable Care Act in the framework that Republicans have unveiled. You have people calling it Obamacare Light. Heritage Action says it doesn't repeal Obamacare, straight up. So I talked to the vice president briefly about that, specifically about conservatives, because, you know, quite frankly, he was one of them in the House for a long time, and it's likely he would have been on their side of this argument, or certainly possible anyway, were he still a member of the House. And he said, look, it's still very early in the legislative process. We still have some back and forth to do, but at the end of the day, this is the right framework for Republicans. It just strikes me that this bill has already had a difficult first 24 hours of life between conservatives on the House side, on the one hand, saying it's not conservative enough, and Republicans, moderates in the Senate saying, look, this does things we're really not comfortable with. That is a potential death grip for this bill, Katie.
It's the ACA and the ACA, the Affordable Care Act and the Affordable Health Care Act.
A lot of changes in here. Fundamentally, the losers in this are the young, the sick, and the losers are the sick, the elderly, and the poor. Fundamentally, gives more advantages to wealthier people. The struggle that they're going to have and that conservatives are going to have with this is you have to get a lot of people into the pool in order to insure those who are sick. No one's ever been able to square that circle. They don't want to force people into insurance, but unless you have a lot of healthy people buying insurance, healthy people and young people don't want to buy insurance, this kind of system doesn't work.
And you made the point that the Health Care Act, the original one, the Affordable Care Act, is very small and or very big, and the new one is very small.
The old one's 2,000 pages, and they keep referencing the fact that the new one's 100 pages. The new one is making all sorts of references to the old one, so it's a silly comparison.
Hallie Jackson, you're at the White House. I don't know if you heard, but I said that you had the best question of the whole briefing. Run it through for me.
Katie, I unfortunately didn't hear you. You just got hooked in here at the briefing. We're joining you now live after that press briefing from Sean Spicer. A couple of questions that I asked him. One related to this issue that he keeps talking about, that the administration keeps referring to, which is that they would like to see the House and Senate Intelligence Committees investigate any accusations of wiretapping, the accusations that President Trump leveled against former President Obama Saturday morning after saying he had just found out information that this had happened. The question posed to Press Secretary Sean Spicer was on if the president has this information, which he indicated he did in that tweet Saturday morning, and if the administration was standing by that tweet, which Sean Spicer said the president is, then why would Congress then need to investigate if this information already exists? The press secretary talked a little bit about the issue, I believe, and I'd have to listen to the verbatim again, Katie, the transcript, but he talked about credibility and the idea that there is a separation of powers as well. We also talked a little bit about the idea that, hey, we're in tax season, right? Tax day is just over a month away. Will the president release his returns from this most recent year? The press secretary said he would get back to to us? And then is the president still under audit from past returns? The press secretary confirming he indeed is.
Yeah,
Katie?
and Sean Spicer saying that it's a separation of powers and they don't want to be perceived as directing Congress to investigate in a certain way. Harold Ford, is this going to dog them for much longer?
It will. The question by Hallie and that other young lady spelled it out. And I think on this health care thing, the governors will be the arbiters. They're the ones who actually where the rubber meets the road. So you have House Republicans, Senate Republicans, moderate conservatives alike, but governors across the country, particularly Republican ones, I think will have the final say in what happens here.
Two major stories. First, healthcare. The other one, what exactly is going on with wiretapping? Both of those dominating that White House press briefing, and both of those things that my colleague Kate Snow is going to be talking about in just a moment. So I'm going to toss it over to her. I am Katie Tur. That'll do it for me. And Kate, take it away.
I feel like I'm kind of crashing your party here. Great discussion. We'll pick it up from here, Katie. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kate Snow. Here are our top stories this hour. 7 years in the making. Republicans this afternoon launching a full-court press to promote their new Obamacare replacement plan. Party leadership, even the White House now getting involved, but not convinced a big chunk of the GOP. This hour, in about 30 minutes from now, the House Freedom Caucus, along with Tea Party senators, will talk about why they think this isn't the right way to repeal and replace. And later on, the Carson controversy. In his first address to his new department, Housing and Urban Development, the Secretary, Ben Carson, referred to slaves as immigrants. A lot of blowback over his comments. We have a lot to get to today, and our team is in place to walk you through all of it. Chris Jansing is at the White House this afternoon. Casey Hunt is on Capitol Hill. Plus, we've got Perry Bacon, senior political writer, at 5:38. Nice to see him again. Let's start off with a hard look at what is in this Obamacare replacement plan. Before we get started here, I want to just run through the basics of the new bill. No more individual mandate. Coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions is still in. Young people can remain on their parents' coverage until age 26. That expansion of Medicaid that happened under Obama, that gets frozen in 2020, and people who let their coverage lapse could see their premiums go up by 30%. And finally, there is still a system of tax credits to help pay for health care on the individual market, but those credits now are based on age. That is something we're going to really dive into. You're going to want to stick with us for that. What does that look like? How does it work? But let me start with our panel right now, and let me start with Chris Jansing at the White House. Chris, this hour we're expecting Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, and the Freedom Caucus, they're called, from the House, who have some concerns about this bill. We're expecting them up on Capitol Hill. The White House obviously pushing hard. We just saw Vice President Pence, and we'll get to more sound from him in just a moment. Is the White House feeling confident right now about getting this through Congress?
Yeah, when you heard them talk about it, and we just finished this long briefing that included HHS Secretary Tom Price, they said that they are going to work this through and just didn't seem to be concerned about what the obvious problem is with this, and that is that on both sides of the House and the Senate, you have Republicans in numbers that threaten this bill who are against it. You mentioned, for example, that you have this this press conference that is coming up. I talked to Rand Paul on Friday. For him and other people, like-minded conservatives, this is nothing more than another entitlement program. It does not accomplish why they wanted to get rid of Obamacare in the first place. That is the cost. You heard the acknowledgement that they don't have any kind of estimate yet from the Congressional Budget Office. When Mick Mulvaney went out for the White House today to talk about it, he acknowledged that they didn't know what the cost is. Over on and on the Senate side, you also have 4 members of the Senate who sent a letter because they're concerned about Medicaid expansion in their states. They're worried about people losing coverage. And so even though you have this situation where the president, it sounds like, is completely all in, the way Sean Spicer put it, there's going to be a very aggressive, laser-like focus on this. It really so far has involved tweeting, some meetings with healthcare people, and he's going to have these folks who will be in charge of helping to wrangle the votes come in for a meeting very shortly here at the White House. No big plan, though, for him to go out to try to sell it. There doesn't seem yet to be a concerted strategy. They are still in the stage, Kate, of trying to figure out exactly what this bill is going to look like.
And yet you think about, Chris, they could have picked anything to start with, right? And they picked Obamacare to start as their big sort of mantelpiece, their big piece of legislation that they want to get through. Let me go to Casey, because she's on Capitol Hill, where I feel like you're living now, Casey. Mike Pence was just there, the vice president, and you had a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, I caught up with him briefly. He was here to talk to senators in the Republican luncheons that just wrapped up, and now he's meeting with members on the House side, and they are all talking about this health care bill and how to get it passed. This bill has had a difficult initial 24 hours of life, to the point where I think there are some legitimate questions to be raised about the future of it, and part of it is coming from opposition from conservatives, particularly in the House. So that's what I pushed Mike Pence on when I spoke to him a couple minutes ago. Hi, Mr. Vice President. Is this plan conservative?
I'm sorry, what?
This health care plan, is it conservative?
This is the right plan for America. It's a framework we believe will repeal Obamacare, which has been a disaster for
Heritage says it doesn't do that. Heritage Action.
And we'll replace this with a plan that will harness the power of the free market, will give states resources and flexibility to be able to reform Medicaid, will help Americans to be able to purchase health insurance, but the cost of health insurance will go down. And so we're looking forward, as I told leaders in the Senate today, as I'm going to be meeting with members of Congress this afternoon, we really do believe this is a historic opportunity to repeal the failed policies of Obamacare and replace it with the kind of reforms that will lower the cost of health insurance, even while we ensure that the most vulnerable have access to better coverage through Medicaid and greater state flexibility.
So why are conservatives so opposed?
I think we're very early in the legislative process, and as the President's made very clear, we're open to working with members of the House and Senate about ways we can improve the bill, but we believe the American Health Care Act is the right framework for replacing Obamacare, and in the days ahead, the President and I both look forward to making that case to members of Congress and to the American people.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Nice. Of course, the key there, that they are very early in this process, seeming to be open to making changes or adjustments. But at this point, it is becoming more difficult to figure out how they square getting it through the House of Representatives, where you have pressure from conservatives, and then sending it over to the Senate, where you already have a group of 4 senators writing letters saying, look, if you end this Medicaid expansion, it's going to be really tough on state budgets and potentially really hurt low-income Americans. So that's very difficult, and any one of these political calculations can make something like this completely fall apart. You remember, I covered the beginning to the end of passing the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, back in 2009, and that was something that took an incredible amount of arm twisting from Nancy Pelosi, who was then, of course, the Speaker of the House. She is very, that is something I think Republicans and Democrats agree she's very good at. You had a president in Barack Obama who was at the height of his popularity right after the election, and those things do not necessarily exist right now for Republicans on Capitol Hill. Speaker Ryan is dealing with a caucus that's much more kind of fractured. The way that he has dealt with them has been to kind of devolve some power. It's unclear if that strategy is going to work in this case. President Trump doesn't have the same popularity now that President Obama had at the time, and all of that could really put all of this in jeopardy, Kate.
Perry Bacon, you wrote on 538 about some of this, about the 7 groups that could complicate GOP plans to repeal Obamacare. I want to run through your article for a second here. You said older Americans, because they could be charged more than younger people. You said conservative lawmakers, because it doesn't go far enough in getting rid of Medicaid expansion for them, or for some of them. You said governors. You say you think that some governors think it's stingy on Medicaid. Another group that you're looking at is people currently getting Affordable Care Act coverage, particularly people with low incomes, because they might not get as much help as they did under Obamacare's income-based structure. Senate Republicans, Casey just outlined that. Voters, particularly Democrats, who don't want to see major changes to the law because they like Obamacare as it is, and people who support abortion rights or Planned Parenthood because federal funds are cut off to Planned Parenthood for a year through Medicaid. Okay, which of these is the biggest challenge, Perry?
I mean, we're talking about a process in Congress. So the biggest challenge, I would say, is the problem Casey laid out, and Chris did too, is that moderates in the Senate think it's too conservative. House members think it's not conservative enough. But I would say also older people, the AARP is organizing against this bill because this bill lets you charge older people much more than younger people. So the AARP is very popular. It's a very influential group. So I do think its opposition matters a lot too. I would add one thing in favor of the bill passing, though. The Republican leaders in the White House view it as this way, which is that most Republicans in Congress ran on repealing Obamacare. So Republican leaders view this as, we dare you to go on the floor and vote against Obamacare after what you promised your constituents. So they had this one advantage, which is that the Republican Party is devoted to changing or repealing Obamacare, and most members do not want to vote against an Obamacare repeal.
Right. Let me go back to Chris Jansing at the White House. Chris, before he took office, President Trump said that he had an alternative vision, right, an alternate vision for health care reform. He made a lot of promises. He went on 60 Minutes and said, well, he was asked, would it be universal health care? And he said, yeah, I really want to take care of everybody. Those were his words. He even said he didn't care if it got him votes or didn't get him votes. But now we hear the president today tweeting that he's going to negotiate with Congress. And we see Mike Pence saying this is the beginning of a process. Is this a shift away from all those big promises he made on the campaign trail?
Yeah, I mean, this was a central focus of his campaign. Anybody who went to or saw any of his rallies saw that this was one of the biggest cheer points. This always got a huge reaction that he was going to get rid of Obamacare and that he had a plan. I mean, remember, he also gave a newspaper interview where he said he had a plan that was going to cover everybody. In January, he talked about that plan. Now it looks as though that plan doesn't exist. He is adopting this. And we heard about really sort of the genesis of how this all came to be today, a little bit with the HHS Secretary Tom Price, who was asked about his support for this. Let's play what he had to say as the voice of this administration right now for this health care change.
Do you support everything that's in the bill sitting on the table, sir?
Well, this is a work in progress, and we'll work with the House and the Senate in this process. As you know, it's a legislative process that occurs.
You know, another way to look at this, Kate, is that this is reality sinking in for this White House that has so few people who have ever been through this process before, that they're realizing how complex this is. You know, there were a lot of people who either laughed or mocked the fact that when the president said he didn't realize how complicated this was going to be. There is no doubt that this is one of the most complicated pieces of legislation that we have seen in recent years. And by the way, if it does get repealed, it would be unprecedented. We've never seen a major program like this that affects millions of people that then has been taken off the table. And obviously, that's part of the concern that we've been talking about for some of these lawmakers.
Chris Jansing at the White House, Casey Hunt up on Capitol Hill, Perry Bacon writing it all for us. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Up next, we're going to dig in on one of the fine points in that stack of papers that you saw at the White House. That's the House's Obamacare repeal bill. Well, the bigger stack is the old Obamacare. We're going to talk about tax credits, which existed in both plans, and what does it mean, what they're trying to do now? What exactly will those tax credits look like? How do they work when we come back?
You're watching MSNBC International.
Our guest tonight is John Kennedy Jr. He's editor.
I'd written for his first edition of George, his magazine, and I asked if he could come on in first edition of our program there. And he said, well, all the women seem to be working late that night. The halls were crowded. He said he had the same lightness of personality that his father had. A very easy guy to take. He had that gift. You just liked him. I mean, for Kennedy, he was pretty open. He seemed to be very unafraid of the camera or of an interview. Good guy. Too bad. Just tragedy.
You disagree with me ideologically.
I do.
You talk about political correctness run amok.
This is about human rights. Do not go there. Does anyone want to challenge me on that?
Morning Joe, weekdays on MSNBC.
This is a time like no other. A time of change and uncertainty. Not just for the country, but for the world. This is when we all need to step up, be more vigilant than ever, and continue to hold all sides accountable. Let's figure this out together.
Rule number 10, Section 2A states a player shall not run with the ball without dribbling it. That's the rule. But what about our politics? Are there any rules anymore? And if so, will anybody play by them? These days, politics could use a little refereeing. And we're not afraid to blow the whistle.
We have an update.
A big political shift.
Watch your favorite MSNBC shows wherever you are.
Pay attention to what politicians say when they don't know we're listening.
Catch the latest full episodes and watch live. Download the MSNBC app today.
Starting just after I got back from my 2 years of life changeover in Africa with the Peace Corps, I have chalked up 5 years working in the U.S. Senate, 4 in the White House, including my time as presidential speechwriter, and 6 years as top aide to Speaker O'Neill. All this background taught me how to watch politicians in action. Here on Hardball, you can expect me to discuss history as it relates to what's happening now. You can expect to hear me analyze what politicians are doing today with what I've seen other politicians do before, and this is Hardball.
Weeknights on MSNBC. While Rachel talks about what matters to America, others are talking about why Rachel matters to America. The center of all things political.
Can you convince them that you are the best person to carry the flag for them on the issues they are dealing with?
Even right-wingers respect how sharp and sane she is.
And that's one of the reasons I'm on your show. You keep to the issues, and I respect that.
Arguably the smartest person on TV.
They didn't expect to fall in love with a guy like this, but Republican voters really have.
Rachel Maddow, only on MSNBC.
More than 1 billion people visit social networking sites every month. Let's talk to our kids about what they publish and post and what they don't. An open dialogue is the best way to help kids navigate the internet safely. The more you know.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, only on MSNBC.
You're looking live at a shot outside the Capitol building. We're going to see the Freedom Caucus there, House members and also some senators talking about the health care bill out of the White House and their reservations, I should say out of the House, and their reservations about that bill. Oh, we went to color bars there, but we're getting ready for that press conference. We'll bring that to you live just as soon as that happens. As we've been reporting all day today, the new Republican health care proposal in the House provides tax credits that people can use to pay for health insurance. But how does that work? For more, I want to bring in my colleague Ali Velshi. He's kind of breaking down the details. Yep. We keep hearing tax credits.
Yep.
You get them up front?
Yeah, so a refundable tax credit generally something to file a tax return for.
Right.
These are
you
called
get it later when
right.
The
This
government
is called
sends
an
it back.
advance refundable tax credit, which means the way it worked under Obamacare is when you sign up for the insurance, you could apply the tax credit immediately. We haven't got the nuts and bolts of it, but this is an advance refundable tax credit. So you get it at the front end.
So you don't have to wait for Uncle
Correct.
Sam to send you
that
your
is
tax return.
how it's
your
supposed
tax
to
refund.
work. We haven't gotten to that level of logistics yet, but that's what we believe to be the case. Here's how it goes. If you're 20 years old, you get $2,000, and as you get older, it increases. Now, at 20, I've been looking around. It's hard to get a full policy for $2,000, but it's possible. At 60, there's zero chance you're getting a insurance policy for $4,000. It might be a catastrophic policy, so there's something really bad. It's not going to cover nearly everything. Now, as you earn more, these are age-based tax credits, but as you earn more, you'll start to see them decrease. So for individuals earning $75K or couples earning $150,000, they'll start to not get the same size of tax credits. And here's the interesting part. Under Obamacare, for a 27-year-old, let's say, healthy, earning just $20,000 a year, which is, on the low end, they would get $3,225 a year in subsidies under Obamacare. Okay. That person is now going to get $2,000.
Wait, let's do that again. So if you're making $20,000 and you're 27 years old.
Yep, $20,000 for a 27-year-old. We're assuming you're relatively healthy. Under Obamacare, you're earning you're getting $32.25 in subsidies and credits. Right. Under the new plan, you're going to get $2,000. So what this leads one to understand after studying it is that if you are ill, if you don't earn very much money, or if you are old, this is not going to be great for you. There's stuff we haven't touched on yet, which you'll talk about later, about Medicaid changes. That's really going to affect a lot of the poor. So this is not a great thing for people who don't earn much money, are sick, or are old.
Right. Although it's hard to generalize, right? Because a lot of the devils are going to be in the details.
Insurance are all about statistics and actuarial studies. So there are going to be outliers on all sides of this thing. But when you generalize, this is
this is instructive. Just seeing an example of one